Hey, welcome to our podcast. I'm Declan Quinn.
I'm Josh Strong.
And I'm Cameron Sjoberg.
Today, we're going to be talking about the philosophical issue and dilemmas that surround the idea of epistemic bubbles and echo chambers.
So this was first came to our attention by the philosopher Quinn, and the epistemic bubble is defined as a social epistemic structure in which some relevant voices have been excluded through omission. And from the reference of two other writers cited by Nguyen, an echo chamber is defined as a group in which the members share beliefs, which include reasons to distrust those outside of an echo chamber.
Both echo chambers and epistemic bubbles can reap harmful effects, leading to the spread of misinformation, active trust of the media or other people, and the blind trust of unverified sources.
So the biggest distinction between echo chambers and epistemic bubbles is in regards to exactly why or how outside information is left unreceived from those inside the bubble and chamber. Epistemic bubbles tend to be viewed as less harmful because they conform with sort of no ill intent through ordinary processes of social selection and community formation, which is in contrast to echo chambers, in which outsiders' perspectives and opinions are actively, knowingly being blocked from those within the chamber.
Regardless of that, though, epistemic bubbles are still harmful and can lead to information being left out of the available scope and can lead to people not having all the necessary information on certain topics.
On the other hand, echo chambers are very harmful to the individuals involved and those near. Echo chambers work by systematically isolating their members from all outside epistemic sources, which leads to people potentially becoming practically brainwashed, for a lack of a better term.
One also says that this mechanism bears a striking resemblance to some accounts of cult indoctrination, indicating that clearly this is not something that is good or leads to good things.
People inside of these echo chambers have a severe lack of trust when it comes to people outside of the echo chamber, whether it be at their own behest or that of someone higher up than them in the echo chamber.
And again, to reiterate, in contrast to epistemic bubbles, echo chambers are created with the intention of leaving out information that differs from that found within the chamber.
Overall, both of these topics are harmful in many ways. They lead to misinformation being spread, and like we said, people being essentially brainwashed and blindly trusting and following the other people inside of their chamber or bubble. And this problem is an urgent one to be solved because people are losing control over the information they receive and in turn, the free will in their lives.
One solution to epistemic bubbles that is mentioned by Nguyen is simply exposing excluded information, as long as the information is available. If it's not part of one standard network, then one must be proactive in their approach to find all relevant information. It's up to those involved to reach out to multiple sources and make sure they have gathered enough information to consider themselves truly informed.
So basically, it's important to keep yourself from being epistemically lazy.
What about echo chambers, though?
So echo chambers are more difficult to solve. Echo chambers could be generational, passed on from a parent to their child through indoctrination, or really from any power figure. One way to approach echo chambers is through Mandevillian intelligence. It's mentioned that while it may be a personal issue to be stubborn in your views, it's beneficial when placed in an academic setting.
So basically, it's in regards to placing two people in different echo chambers in an academic setting and watch them debate and cover as much unknown ground as possible.
Another method is simply throwing out all beliefs and starting again from scratch, but this approach is nearly impossible. So the final option is to attempt to gain trust from an outsider, someone who is not a member of the echo chamber. This could allow a member to recognize that they are in an echo chamber and allow them to see different points of view.
Another interesting thing to me personally is to think about regarding bubbles in chambers is how the idea of technology and interactions within websites or social media fits into the mix. Upon my own personal research and found within a scholarly source from Talamanca and Arfini with descriptions from Galusha, the phenomena of filter bubbles is discussed, in which an individual or group is isolated due to a website algorithm selectively guessing what a user would like to see based on collected information. So this is something like when you're looking for like a specific search term on like a search engine or something like that, it takes your previously searched terms and like basically your digital footstep and it suggests certain things. So filter bubbles share similarities with the ideas of disclusion of outside perspectives, like epistemic bubbles and echo chambers, but it focuses more on the internet's responsibility at play.
Filter bubbles are widely understood as one of the most easily seen influences stemming from artificial intelligence, another widely discussed philosophical issue, but for another podcast.
The original concept of the filter bubble stemmed from activist Eli Fraser, and with its conception, it became one of the most turned to points in opposition for artificial intelligence and raised awareness to some more problems of epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. Those in opposition to the idea of filter bubbles reference the impediment on the user's free will that occurred with the phenomenon.
So if the internet or search engines sway the user to click on certain suggested items that are offered through artificial intelligence, it can seem as if the internet is putting an individual in a bubble.
So Fraser's argument lies under the assumption that individuals do not value diverse opinions from their own. If it is to believe that if someone is given information appealing to them from artificial intelligence, and they won't actively try to search out opinions different than their own, then it is to be believed that filter bubbles pose an issue. He proposes the sort of idea of parallel but separate universes, and the idea of algorithmic personalization leading to isolation.
So what's the solution to stopping or succeeding the effects of filter bubbles?
So with the potentially harmful effects of filter bubbles and algorithmic personalization being made extremely evident by Fraser and other activists, there are two potential solutions provided in the sources. One solution suggests a difficult approach at a larger scale, in which activists suggest that in order for a shift to occur, there needs to be different and immense measurements of the adaptation of algorithms to specific users available, which isn't something that is necessarily capable at the current scale. The other solution is a bit more simple, in which, in order to avoid the effects of filter bubbles individually, one can appear to search out other data in opposition to their own view. So if somebody has like a certain opinion in regards to like a political issue or really any issue of that sort of caliber, actively seeking out information that is from a different opinion or a different sort of information than their own can help to sort of minimize the effects of filter bubbles. When actively attempting to reach out to views that differ to the things you're trying to search out, you escape succeeding to a filter bubble, as well as in echo chamber and epistemic bubble.
So when the main issue is in regards to the lack of information in opposition to your own, the simplest solution is to actively try to obtain the information.
So what are your guys' opinions on epistemic and filter bubbles and echo chambers?
Well, me personally, when I look at the idea of echo chambers and epistemic bubbles, I think the most interesting and the most perplexing aspect of them to me is the actual formation of these bubbles and chambers. I think that it's pretty easily understandable how one could fall victim to a bubble or echo chamber through indoctrination, but it's hard to sort of grasp the idea of just exactly how it like starts as a concept. With epistemic bubbles, I think the idea of how they begin seems to be like sort of like an unfortunate chain of events, and it's really like nobody's fault per se. Perhaps there's like a group or community of people that don't necessarily have the tools or resources to actively seek out information. And as a result, these people lack like an outside opinion and eventually would create an epistemic bubble. I think that it's the same idea as to why epistemic bubbles last longer than they should as well. So like if someone is unknown or like unbeknown to any outside view that clashes with their own, there isn't really anything to feasibly seek out if you just straight up don't acknowledge that they exist. If somebody doesn't know necessarily what they're missing, the information that's missing from them isn't really even conceivable. On the contrary, however, echo chambers to me personally seem almost impossible to like actively try to start. I think in order to initiate an echo chamber in which insiders are like actively trying to block information out from the outsiders, you have to rally other very passionate individuals that share sort of the same opinion that you do. And when you rally these people with such a strong opinion on the opposing cause, it sort of creates like this sort of echo chamber. But personally, I didn't think that such a passion for like blocking information from other people was possible. But after learning about echo chambers, I sort of see it more and more as I look closer. Although the idea of echo chambers formation is sort of still a mystery to me, a conclusion that I've drawn is possibly what makes it so hard to escape an echo chamber is just how hard it is to form and indoctrinate others. And then another thing that I sort of especially took away from the idea of echo chambers and epistemic bubbles was the concept of the scale in which everything occurs. So I think that is pretty evident when understanding just exactly what an echo chamber and an epistemic bubble are, just how present they are today when looking at the world around us. I personally see echo chambers and epistemic bubbles wherever really I care to look, whether that be somebody's grandpa in like a Facebook group disregarding information from a different political party, or something at the larger scale like full-blown cults. I think the idea of filter bubbles brought by Pazer also gives insight into just how common these things of the nature are. With seeing issues like this happen in something as common as just like searching for something on the internet, it really gives insight to the scale at which this stuff happens.
In regards to how they form, I agree. To me, it's also kind of still a mystery, and it does perplex me to think about, because I can't picture any like specific way one of these things could form, although we do see them everywhere I look, especially with social media, which I'll get into.
I don't think I have any comments here, but I do think that is a good way to segue into your segment, bring up social media.
So personally, I think that technology, I know you touched on this, Declan, but technology today, especially social media, has played a huge role in perpetuating the problem of epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. So this technological advancement has made it incredibly easy for people to interact with each other, obviously, which may seem like a reason this problem would be fading out, because the more you can interact with somebody else, the more you can interact with people that aren't inside of your epistemic bubble or your echo chamber. But it also has made it much harder to find necessary information because of the incredible amount of information that is accessible to us. So it's hard to determine what information is actually true and what information is not true. Like, what's been fact checked by reliable sources and what hasn't. And along with all this information being available, like I said, it's increasingly difficult to know what information you can actually trust. And this can be where the problem arises. When someone is telling you that something is true and not to believe other pieces of information or other people that have whole different beliefs, that can easily landslide into the creation of an echo chamber.
I especially resonated with the part that you talked about how you would think that would be easier to, with social media and like sort of this interaction with like a bunch of people, how you would think it'd be easier to sort of like dissolve these echo chambers and epistemic bubbles. But personally, I think that people, especially on the internet, really only hear what they want to hear and only seek out what they want to seek out. So when you have sort of these like groups sort of like indoctrinating and like sort of coercing like these people that share similar views of themselves, sort of like you sort of like indoctrinate them into like an echo chamber and epistemic bubble, I can definitely see how that would happen and how that would be a problem as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends what corner of the internet you find yourself at.
Exactly.
With so much information being out there on the internet, and with the super popular apps that people use in social media these days, I think there's a fine line in terms of fact checking and stuff like that, because if you go too far, you could in yourself, and this kind of segues into what I'm going to talk about, you could kind of in yourself create your own sort of echo chamber and your own sort of epistemic bubble if you kind of go too far or try too hard to make sure that what other people are saying out there isn't out there. You know what I mean? I think you kind of have to take the good with the bad a little bit to see kind of either both sides or determine for yourself what's right or wrong.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was starting to get at there at the end of that of my take there. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, me personally, I'm in agreement with that. That the idea that social media is the main proponent for both epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. I do kind of take this a little farther. I think news sources can also help this issue. They tie into social media as well these days. An app like YouTube, it creates an epistemic bubble and an echo chamber by picking and choosing what is right and what is wrong when it comes to information. And this careful selection creates an omission of other opinions and possibly other facts. And it ties into news sources because the biggest sources of news are meant to support a specific political side really these days. And no matter which side you do support, you will find facts and arguments intentionally made to be partisan through these sources. And this could mean that headlines can be made to grab you rather than inform you. Those sharing the information can pick and choose what supports their argument the best. And news sources also prefer to be quick with their stories these days because it is a source of revenue, meaning they could be incorrect, but the damage could already be done at that point. And the algorithm, so to speak, makes it increasingly difficult for you to do your own research, at least through these applications, because apps such as YouTube censor their subjective view of information. And I think the creation of an epistemic bubble can eventually lead to an echo chamber, because the intentional omission of certain information and the picking and choosing of information and those who spread it will eventually push any other opinion out of this supposed marketplace of ideas. And one issue is that the majority of people will get their news from social media these days, especially you see clips of news on YouTube. And rather than digging into their own sources, social media has a very large grab on our attention spans these days, and it's easier on our attention spans to watch an edited video or a snippet rather than watching a full video for context and for all the information. And it's a lot easier to take people's words for it when they are deemed to be credible. So I think it's important for people to make sure they look at every relevant source of information and understand that news sources also have their own sources that they are able to look at, and to ensure that they're informed and can have their own opinion on the matter rather than being coerced in any sort of belief through the instant satisfaction habit that we have that's been brought upon us with social media.
I agree with all that too. Especially the part where you mentioned how the algorithm can kind of lead to us getting information that is not necessarily the best information for us to have to give us all the information. It kind of goes back to what Declan said earlier about the filter bubbles, how, you know, the algorithm and social media are kind of creating those and almost trapping us inside of those as well.
Yeah, I agree. What resonated with me, in addition to sort of like looking at the news and like YouTube and like other social medias sort of effects on epistemic bubbles in echo chambers. Another thing that really resonated to me with what you said, Cameron, was in regards to um, epistemic bubbles sort of shifting into echo chambers. I thought that was a really interesting concept, and it's definitely one that I can see how, like, when an epistemic bubble is sort of prompted with these ideas of like other information and whatnot that they haven't really necessarily seen before. I can definitely see how that sort of elicits like a negative response, and like you want to like actively push out this information, and how it sort of turns into an echo chamber. All right, and with that, it looks like that is all the time we have today. Thanks again for following us along as we discussed everything echo chamber and epistemic bubble. Once again, I'm Declan.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Cameron. Goodbye.